Hello everyone, it's the Mad Catter again. Today I wanted to talk about something I found a little disturbing. Now, I'm not a fan of the Young Turks. I think that should be apparent by my beliefs, which I've shared here on this channel. I typically ignore this group of people altogether, but recently I couldn't help but take a look at a video from last month titled "Study Finds This Key Difference in Conservative Brains." Now, I might not be a conservative, but I smelled something fishy, and like an alley cat, I decided to investigate the garbage can from whence this odor was wafting.
I love trash. If you really want to see something trashy, look at this.
Really interesting article in Washington Post from a professor at Yale University, John Bart. Now, he did a study with fellow researchers. It's going to be in the new issue of European Journal of Social Psychology. But in this article, he talks about some things that scientists knew before, and then gets to the study and what they learned recently. And this is about how conservatives and liberals think differently. In fact, our brains are wired a little bit differently. This is really interesting, and it helps you figure out what motivates conservatives in this case. So he explains, over a decade now of research in political psychology consistently shows that how physically threatened or fearful a person feels is a key factor, although clearly not the only one, in whether he or she holds conservative or liberal attitudes. That's fascinating. So it turns out whether you're more afraid or not is going to determine whether you're conservative or liberal. Now, conservatives are pretty good at marketing, so they've said all along, liberals are wimps and they're, pushovers, and conservatives are strong. Now let's find out if that's true. Conservatives, it turns out, react more strongly to physical threat than liberals do. In fact, their greater concern with physical safety seems to be determined early in life. And this is amazing, listen to this. In one University of California study, the more fear a 4-year-old showed in a laboratory situation, the more conservative his or her political attitudes were found to be 20 years later.
Okay, so what exactly happened here? Did they scare some 4-year-old children in a lab to prove their hypothesis 20 years later? I mean, this just sounds like normal human or animal reaction to a possibly cruel experiment.
Turns out conservatives are hardwired to be afraid. So the people who are more fearful wind up becoming conservative. And when you think about it, it makes all the sense in the world. What is the primary motivation for conservatives? I'm afraid of immigrants. I'm afraid of terrorism. I'm afraid of crime. I'm afraid of drugs. I'm afraid of the God upstairs. I'm afraid of everything. They're driven by fear. Oh, the gays, I'm so afraid of them. I need my gun, I'm so afraid, I'm afraid. Everything is fear, fear, fear. Listen to this, brain imaging studies have even shown that the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, is actually larger in conservatives than in liberals.
Fear gives you the ability to recognize danger. It elicits a change in behavior to fight, flight, or freeze. Is it possible that an underdeveloped amygdala would cause a person to freeze, having no idea how to deal with a particular situation? Is there a study for that?
So if you're not into a conservative, have a little bit of sympathy for them. Their brain is actually structured so that they're constantly afraid. Now, it's a little different, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but the studies have borne it out, and on average, this is the conservative mind. So look, you can look at it two ways. One is, well, no wonder they're cowards. The other way you could look at it as a liberal and a progressive is our poor brothers and sisters. They can't help it. They were born with a different brain that makes them afraid of everything.
Shank or Gank or whatever his name is would like for you to believe that there are only two ways to consider Republicans based on the information he delivers. Either with indifference toward a coward or with pity for someone suffering from a mental disability.
But before, so they asked them a bunch of questions, but before they answered the survey questions, we had them engage in an intense imagination exercise. They were asked to close their eyes and richly imagine being visited by a genie who granted them a superpower. For half of our participants, this superpower was to be able to fly under one's own power. For the other half, it was to be completely physically safe, invulnerable to any harm. If they had just imagined being able to fly, their responses to social attitude survey showed the usual clear difference difference between Republicans and Democrats. The former endorsed more conservative positions on social issues and were also more resistant to social change in general. But if they had instead just imagined being completely physically safe, the Republicans became significantly more liberal. Their positions on social attitudes were much more like the Democratic respondents. And on the issue of social change in general, the Republicans' attitudes were now indistinguishable from the Democrats. That's amazing.
So the flying scenario represented total free will. It's inevitable that with free will comes inherent risks. And with the knowledge of these risks comes fear. And with fear comes a more clear idea of what you should and shouldn't do in order to stay safe. Now, if you're already safe to begin with, there's no free will really to mention here. There are no risks that you're taking, no chance of harm coming to you as a result of your choices. You're not prepared for any changes, and especially not negative ones. Now, yeah, there are some extreme people on the right who have an overactive sense of fear, producing some really nasty behavior, just as there are some extreme people on the left with an underactive sense of fear. They do reckless things and endanger their lives and those around them, often in search of pleasure and self-satisfaction.
We reasoned making people feel safer about a dangerous flu virus should serve to calm their fears about immigrants, and making them feel more threatened by the flu virus should cause them to be more against immigration than they were before. In a 2011 study, my colleagues and I showed just that. First, we reminded our nationwide sample of liberals and conservatives about the threat of the flu virus during the H1N1 epidemic, and then measured their attitudes toward immigration. Afterward, we simply asked them if they'd already gotten their flu shot or not. It turned out that those who had not gotten a flu shot, feeling threatened, expressed more negative attitudes towards immigration, while those who had received the vaccination, feeling safe, had more positive attitudes about immigration. Now, my favorite is the final part of the study, or the final study in this situation. In another study, using hand sanitizer after being warned about the flu virus had the same effect on immigration attitudes as had being vaccinated. A simple squirt of Purell after we had raised the threat of the flu had changed their minds. It made them feel safe from the dangerous virus, and this made them feel socially safe from immigrants as well.
So, people feel safer around strangers when they have protection, like vaccinations or some hand sanitizer. That's such a totally revolutionary idea.
It's amazing how the human mind works. A little bit of Purell, and all of a sudden they're like, immigrants aren't so bad. A lot of this stuff is not thought consciously. Of course not. A conservative doesn't get a little bit of hand sanitizer and go, that's it, I'm a liberal now. He doesn't consciously think that, but subconsciously, that is the effect that it has. Amazing. So I think that if we want to have more advancement, and more important than anything else, rational decision making in our government, what we need to do is take the fear out. Take the money out, but we also need to take the fear out. And if you do it, and if you expose the Republican tricks to try to lead people in the wrong direction, I think you'll be shocked at what a percentage of the country becomes more and more progressive.
So you're saying that if you expose the Republicans, then more people would be progressive? Alright, so the moral of this story is delivered through the spin of the Young Turks, apparently, is that people who have bad things happen to them are sick people who are born this way, and you should pity them. What I find most amazing is the number of comments from people who actually have decent writing skills, but apparently no sense of logical deduction, street smarts, or even the desire to research the topic to learn more. Their education on this matter stops at Schenk. I just wanted to explore these seemingly undisputed claims made by a rather influential media source because it didn't settle well with me. It made little sense on the surface and even less sense the more I listened. So here's a more level-headed source of information on this subject.
It's most commonly associated with fear, although that's not its only function. It's its most heavily studied function, and the reason for that is that it's much easier to study fear than other emotions, things that are are bad have more weight than things that are good, in a sense. I mean, you can put off eating, drinking, sex, whatever for an indefinite amount of time, but you have to respond to danger immediately. You don't find great novels about happy subjects. It's always about, the bad stuff. And it's sometimes said that there's this negative bias in emotion, which is that most research on emotion is about the negative stuff. But the fact is that the negative stuff turns out to be the most important for survival, in a sense, in terms of immediacy and having to respond.
So I guess if anything horrible ever befalls your community, like a natural disaster, a war, or something even crazier, you might want to befriend the neighbors with larger amygdalas if you plan to survive. Of course, for all I know, I could be wrong. I'm no scientist. So make up your own mind. Make your own call for sure. But just remember, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. At least that's what I thought. I don't know. It might make you more mental. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, everyone. And thanks, Young Turks, for reporting so blatantly one-sided that I must research more just to simply quench my thirst for the truth. Please like and subscribe if you're feeling generous, and leave any questions or comments below. Until next time, I'll likely be off having another strange experience.